The human species has existed for approximately 300,000 years, enduring various environmental changes, natural disasters, and catastrophic events. From ice ages to devastating pandemics and world wars, humanity has demonstrated resilience and adaptability. However, imagining human survival in a much earlier period of Earth's history presents an entirely different challenge. If a person were to be transported for 100 million years into the past, into the Devonian period, the experience would be unlike anything seen in recorded history. The Devonian was a time when marine life dominated, and land was still in the early stages of transformation. Survival in such an environment would not only be difficult but nearly impossible. At this point in history, the Earth was vastly different from what we know today. Approximately 85% of the planet was covered in water, leaving only a small percentage of landmass exposed. Instead of the familiar continents of today, only 2 supercontinents existed. The larger of these, Gondwana, contained a massive mountain range that resembled the modern-day Himalayas. Over millions of years, these mountains eroded, depositing sediments into the ocean. These sediments were rich in nutrients, which contributed to the flourishing of marine ecosystems and played a key role in the evolutionary explosion of marine life during the Devonian period. While this period was a time of great biodiversity for aquatic species, the same could not be said for terrestrial life. If a person were to find themselves stranded in the Devonian, one of the first challenges would be finding shelter. Unlike today, forests, grasslands, and jungles did not exist. Instead, the land was barren, resembling the surface of Mars more than anything else. There were no trees, no large plants, and no animals to provide resources for survival. The only vegetation consisted of mosses and small, primitive plants that barely reached the height of an adult human's ankle. Building a shelter would require immense creativity, perhaps by using dried moss and stones, though this would offer little protection from the elements or potential predators. Clothing would also be a problem. With no natural fibers like cotton or wool available, and no animal skins to use for warmth, a stranded individual might be forced to fashion garments from moss, seashells, or fish bones. This makeshift attire, though impractical, would be the only available option. Without proper shelter, exposure to the elements would be a significant threat. While the Devonian climate was generally warm, conditions could still be unpredictable, with extreme temperature shifts between day and night. Without trees or large rock formations to provide shade, the heat of the sun could become overwhelming during the day, leading to dehydration or heat exhaustion. At night, temperatures could drop significantly, making it difficult to stay warm without adequate clothing or insulation. Additionally, wind and rain could pose serious challenges. Without natural barriers to block strong winds, dust and sand could easily get into a person's eyes and lungs, causing discomfort and potential health problems. Rain would also present difficulties, as the lack of proper shelter would leave a person completely exposed to the elements, leading to hypothermia in extreme cases. Another crucial factor to consider would be protection from potential threats. While land-based predators were not yet widespread, there were still dangers to be aware of. The presence of early arthropods, such as giant millipede-like creatures and scorpion ancestors, could pose a risk if they became territorial or aggressive. Additionally, as marine life was the dominant force in the Devonian, a person wandering too close to the water's edge could inadvertently attract dangerous sea predators. The lack of trees or caves meant that finding a truly secure location to rest would be a challenge, forcing an individual to remain constantly alert to avoid potential dangers. Aside from physical challenges, psychological distress would also become a major factor. Being completely alone in such an unfamiliar and harsh environment could quickly lead to feelings of isolation and despair. Humans are social creatures, and the absence of companionship or communication would take a significant toll on mental health. The stress of having to constantly seek food, water, and shelter, coupled with the fear of unknown threats, could lead to exhaustion and decreased cognitive function over time. Without a clear plan for long-term survival or the hope of rescue, a person stranded in the Devonian would face not only physical hardships but also the overwhelming burden of psychological survival. In an effort to improve their situation, a stranded individual might attempt to construct a more stable shelter over time. Utilizing the limited resources available, they might experiment with stacking stones to form walls or digging shallow pits to create some form of enclosure. Moss and primitive plants could be gathered to provide a softer sleeping surface, reducing discomfort caused by sleeping directly on the rocky ground. If lucky, the individual might find a natural depression in the landscape that could serve as a makeshift shelter, offering at least some protection from the elements. However, without the ability to create sturdy structures or use advanced survival techniques, any shelter built in the Devonian would be extremely rudimentary and provide only minimal comfort. The challenge of clothing would remain an ongoing struggle. The idea of fashioning garments from moss or fish bones might work temporarily, but these materials would not be durable or practical for long-term use. Moss would dry out and crumble, while fish bones would be brittle and uncomfortable against the skin. Without access to tools for weaving or stitching, creating any kind of functional clothing would be nearly impossible. A person might be forced to remain mostly exposed to the elements, relying on the natural warmth of the environment to prevent hypothermia. However, prolonged exposure to the sun could lead to severe sunburn, increasing discomfort and health risks. Overall, surviving in the Devonian without proper shelter and clothing would be a near impossible task. The barren landscape, extreme environmental conditions, and lack of materials would make finding security and comfort incredibly difficult. Even with creativity and determination, the limited resources would offer little chance of long-term survival, making the experience one of constant struggle against the harsh realities of prehistoric Earth. Food scarcity would present another major obstacle. Since the land lacked large animals, hunting for meat would be impossible. Instead, the only available sources of sustenance would be found in the ocean, a highly dangerous place teeming with terrifying predators. Some of the most fearsome creatures of the Devonian period were the placoderms, a type of armored fish with powerful, crushing jaws. Among them, Dunkleosteus stood out as one of the largest and most formidable, reaching up to 10 meters, 33 feet, in length. This apex predator could easily snap a human in half with its razor-sharp bite. Fishing would not only be challenging due to the lack of proper tools, but also life-threatening, as any attempt to catch smaller fish could attract much larger, more dangerous ones. Even if someone were lucky enough to catch a fish, cooking it would be another issue. With no trees to provide firewood, starting a fire would be extremely difficult. The only available option would be to collect dry moss and attempt to spark a flame using stones. Even then, firewood would be in short supply, making it difficult to cook consistently. As a result, a stranded human might be forced to survive on a raw diet of mollusks, early arthropods, and other primitive marine life. As time passed, the Devonian landscape underwent significant transformations. By the late Devonian period, plant life had evolved dramatically. Vascular plants, including ferns and the first trees, began to dominate the land. Their deep roots broke apart rocky ground, releasing minerals and nutrients into nearby water sources. This sudden influx of nutrients led to an explosion of algal growth in oceans, depleting oxygen levels in the water and causing one of Earth's first major mass extinction events. Scientists estimate that nearly 79% to 87% of all marine species perished due to these changes. While this extinction event was disastrous for ocean life, it also created new opportunities. Some sea creatures slowly adapted to life on land, evolving into amphibious species capable of breathing air. Among these early land dwellers was Tiktaalik, a fascinating transitional species between fish and tetrapods. Discovered in the Canadian Arctic, Tiktaalik had a crocodile-like head, strong bony fins, sharp teeth, and a flat body about 3 meters, 9 feet, long. Its fins had partial wrists, allowing it to crawl onto land, making it one of the first known species capable of both swimming and limited movement on solid ground. Despite these evolutionary advancements, survival in the Devonian would remain incredibly challenging. The oceans, though depleted of many species, still housed dangerous creatures, including early cartilaginous fish, the ancestors of modern sharks and rays. These predators, although less fearsome than Dunkleosteus, would still pose significant threats. On land, the increasing presence of plant life would provide some new advantages. With trees becoming more common, The availability of wood could allow for the creation of simple tools such as spears, fishing hooks, and ropes. Firewood would also be easier to find, making cooking a more viable option. As a result, a stranded human might finally have access to more diverse food sources, including the early ancestors of insects and small land-dwelling arthropods. This could lead to an improved diet, but the lack of large land animals would still make finding protein a constant struggle. One major breakthrough of the late Devonian period was the emergence of large trees, such as Archaeopteris. This species, considered the first true tree, grew up to 30 meters, 90 feet, tall, and had a trunk about 3 meters, 9 feet, wide. With this new resource, a stranded human could attempt to construct a more stable shelter, perhaps even a treehouse for protection against potential predators. Clothing would also become more practical, as plant fibers could be used to create woven fabrics rather than relying on itchy moss or fragile fish bones. However, despite these improvements, survival would still be far from easy. Although life on Earth was evolving at a rapid pace, the Devonian was only the beginning of a long and complex process of terrestrial development. The coming geological periods would introduce even greater evolutionary changes, leading to the rise of reptiles, mammals, and eventually the dinosaurs of the Mesozoic era. If a human were stranded in the Devonian, they might find brief moments of stability, but the constant environmental shifts and mass extinctions would make long-term survival nearly impossible. Furthermore, the inability to communicate with or form societies with other intelligent beings would take a psychological toll. Humans, being social creatures, rely on cooperation and shared knowledge to thrive. Alone in a primitive and dangerous world, an individual would struggle not only physically but also mentally. Ultimately, the Devonian period presents one of the most inhospitable environments for human survival. With limited resources, deadly predators, and an ever-changing landscape, the odds of lasting more than a few weeks would be slim. While modern humans have demonstrated remarkable adaptability, the lack of essential tools, food, and social structures in the Devonian would make long-term existence an overwhelming challenge. This thought experiment not only highlights the dangers of Earth's distant past, but also underscores the importance of evolutionary progress. Without the slow, gradual development of ecosystems and species over millions of years, human life as we know it would never have been possible.